folks, Rob here, bringing you another Initial Recce. This one's ASL Scenario 153, Totsugeki, Japanese versus Chinese nationalist in Burma, 10 January 1944. So rather than do that recon on the Kokoda Trail, the one that I solo played, we just did not like it, Dave and I, for both probably the same reasons. It's just it's not for us. So we're not going to do that one. We're gonna do this one instead. So I'm going to do this initial recce, and then I'll probably do a solo playthrough, and then at some point you'll see actual game footage of Dave and I having a go. So we have a lot to cover. Let's get to it. So the scenario information is 10 January 1944 is when this happens. It's near Kantau in Burma. And again, it features IGA that are trying to do a flanking surrounding attack on some nationalist Chinese guns. Lasts 6.5 turns, and it's about 4.5, 4.3 hours of playtime based off of Scenario Archive and their recorded plays that they have. It does use half of board 37, which is, as you can see, they're going to be quite dense, and it only uses hex rows R to GG. Now, PTO is going to be in effect, but that's just light jungle, so there's no dense jungle to worry about. But the other terrain will be there, example, kunai, palm trees, and bamboo. On Scenario Archive, there's actually 3 different versions that you can see. One is that came out, and I believe it was one of the annuals. Then there was the 2013 Rising Sun, and then the 2021 version. Now, and each one has its own sets of recorded win-loss ratios. However, if you compile them both together, you're looking at a fairly balanced scenario. Rating on the 2013 version is 7.4, which is quite decent actually. And as we said, it's got kind of parity. I don't know the difference between the 2021 and 2013. From what I gather, just looking at Scenario Archive, the summaries, there's no change. Maybe they added no kindling, but one of the SSRs. But again, I'm not sure what the differences are. But overall, the scenario seems to be well received. Now, historically, the Chinese were able to fend off the Japanese attacks, so we'll see how that all goes. So there's some critical rules that you have to know to play this scenario. For the Japanese, we have the bonsai ability, the step reduction you can see there, and the DC heroes could be in play. For the Chinese, you cannot deploy. You have 0 heat of battle die roll modifier. However, you do get a +1 to your leader creation, which probably going to mean a lesser quality leader. And you have the capability for dare death squads, where you share some similarities with the Japanese when it comes to hand-to-hand, etc. Now, the terrain that you're going to have to get a grasp of is light jungle, bamboo, and kunai. There's also some swamp marsh hexes, but typically those are going to be avoided. And there's a couple of water obstacles in some of the hexes, but again, those are all going to be non-navigable. And given the year, it's going to be no quarter in effect for both sides. Looking at the SSRs, there's only 3. The first one is your typical environment, so ECR moist with no wind at start. PTO is in effect, which means there's no roads, and any roads that cut through tree lines are replaced with paths, as you can see there. Light jungle only, so there's no dents. And palm trees are basically orchards that are never out of season. All wheat is replaced with kunai, which is treated as brush, so it's only a line of sight hindrance between fire and target. And kindling is NA. Now, when it comes to the second SSR, the Chinese guns, you can see the 3 that are there. They must sit up in those positions using those covered arcs. Now, the Japanese were going to enter from the bottom of the board from the south, and they're going to head towards the north, while the Chinese can set up on or north of hex row 3. So you can see those guns there. Again, that's their starting positions. You can clearly rotate them. However, they will never be concealed and or emplaced, and you cannot move them out of their hexes. So that's going to be the victory conditions, those 3 guns. You also have no canister ammunition, and no bore sighting is allowed, even though no Japanese units start on board. You are allowed to hip 2 squad equivalents and any SMC support weapons with them for the Chinese. And then lastly, with regarding the guns themselves, this is the last SSR. They will not be eliminated if you malfunction them and you rolled a 6 for a repair attempt. It's just merely marked with a gun disabled counter. However, it's kept on board for victory point purposes. However, if you intend to fire it, causing a permanent breakdown by rolling an original 11 or 12, that will eliminate the gun. So most of those guns, given the positions and where the Japanese are going to be coming on from, you're going to be firing point blank, which probably means you're only going to get one, maybe two shots off anyways before you're going to be engaged. All right, so let's look at the attacker. Now, the Japanese order battle is going to be 11 squads. There's 4 of the elite 448s, and then you have 7 first line 447s. So look at the smoke exponents. They're both capable of firing smoke, and the elite is capable of firing white phosphorus. Remember, you always deduct 1 from the exponent, so on a 1, they'll be able to drop some white phosphorus grenades. They, when it comes to manning the medium, which is given as dismantled at start, which means that's how it has to enter the play, it must be manned by a crew. Otherwise, you suffer penalties, 1 reduction in rate of fire, and your breakdown decreases. So for mediums and heavies on the Japanese side, you're always being manned by a crew. Now, first and elites are always considered stealthy, unless, of course, you bonsai, in which case you're considered lax. And they have an ELR of 4 with a sniper activation number of 4 as well. So all in all, pretty good for the Japanese. Now they also have 3 leaders, and they're treated much like commissars. We have a 10-0, a 9-1, and a 9-0. You may want to throw your 9-1 with your medium just to get some modifier, because you're going to be firing at the jungle primarily, which is going to be a +2, and or the enemy does have foxholes, which will also be a +2 as well. Japanese leaders, remember, always raise the morale of any unit that they're with by 1. So if this unit here is with some 447s and they bonsai, the 447 would actually have a morale of 9. So it's quite good from that perspective. Now, Japanese leaders never break. They merely get wounded. And if you get wounded twice, then you're eliminated. So remember, you only basically get 2 chances to take a hit before you get eliminated. They also have the drawbacks of a commissar when it comes to rallying. So when this 447 is eventually replaced with a half squad and broken, normally commissars ignore DM. However, should I fail to rally, then this unit would be ELR replaced until such point it's a conscript, and then it would be eliminated. So just remember that from the commissar rule for the Japanese leaders. Now, when it comes to firepower, we have a lot on the Japanese side. We've got 2 DCs, which can be used to generate DC heroes. A little more on that in a second. You got 3 LMGs, which can be used by any units. And then, of course, you have the medium that comes on dismantled, and it must be manned by the crew, as we said. So this medium, once it's assembled, as well as the LMGs, all have a breakdown of 11. So just remember that the Japanese weapons are breaking down on 11s. And lastly, it comes to the mortar itself. Now this 50mm Japanese mortar, also called the knee mortar, it comes on, you could dismantle it as you enter. Obviously, you have to assemble it to fire it, and it's got some unique properties. First of all, it can fire smoke with a depletion number of 7 from 3 to 10 hexes. First of all, the range is actually 1 to 16, so you can fire adjacent all the way up to 16 hex range. Inside that 1 to 16 range, you can fire smoke between 3 and 10 hexes. You can fire white phosphorus with a depletion number of 6 between 1 and 5 hexes, and your rate of fire drops. And you can fire HE between 1 and 16 hexes. However, if you fire at 1 to 2, then your rate of fire will drop by 1 and there will be no air burst. So from 3 hexes to 16, you will have air burst. From 1 to 2, you will not have any air burst. So it's very important. Given the nature of the terrain that you're going to be facing, it's very dense, and you're probably not going to get a lot of 3 or more hex shots off before you start closing with it. All right, so other Japanese particulars is the bonsai ability. Plenty of videos out there, including one that I did, explain how that works. But in essence, it's essentially the Japanese version of the human wave. However, you do not require some of the same things that a normal human wave does. You can use units in one hex as long as you have a leader for one or more MMCs. You can conduct a single hex bonsai or multiple hex adjacency bonsais, etc. Once you enter the close combat phase, you'll be considered lax. Basically, at the end of your move, your bonsai counter gets flipped over to lax. So when it comes to close combat, Japanese will always use hand-to-hand if they are the attacker and or if they've gained ambush. And don't forget that in hand-to-hand use, the Japanese get an extra -1 unless they're pinned or unarmed. Now, when it comes to a DC hero, these could be generated. A unit could generate one, and you basically make a die roll attempt. On a 3 or less, you'll have a hero, whether it's a tank hero, tank hunter hero, or a DC hero. They're both generated the same way. For our purposes, we're only going to worry about the DC hero because for obvious reasons. Now, the modifier is going to be a -2 if the unit has a DC when it attempts it. But there's a caveat. You got to be within 8 movement factors and in LOS of your target when you declare your attempt. And if you rolled an original 6, your unit's going to be pinned in place. However, 5 or less, and you'll have a hero generated with the DC that can merrily charge on its way and attempt to enter its target hex, detonating at the DC and killing himself in the process. All right, looking at the Chinese now, we have Nationalist Chinese with 15 first-line MMCs, all 337s. Note they have no smoke exponent, so they're not going to be able to do anything like that. And they can also not deploy, so you're going to have to spread yourself out over the half boards to try and deny access to the Japanese too easily. Because you're starting on board and the Japanese are not, all your units will be concealed. So these 8 concealment counters can be used as dummy stacks to throw off the enemy. You also have a 0 modifier to heat of battle, unlike the Japanese who have a +4. And you can conduct human waves, much like the Russian could. So you need to have an average of 2 or more squads, MMCs per hex, a minimum of 3 hexes adjacent with the leader, and then you can declare a human wave attempt. You can also pre-select up to, in this scenario, 2 squads to act as dare death. You basically temporarily berserk. You get the -1 hand-to-hand, and you just require a leader to be with you or adjacent to you, with both of you having line of sight to an enemy and within 8 movement factors in order to declare it. The Chinese in this scenario are really going to be penalized with ELR. They have an ELR of 2. The sniper activations of 3, but the ELR is of concern because they all have broken morale. So when you, or I should say, a lowered morale when broken. So if you look at the back front on the 7 on the front, we have a 6 on the back, which is going to be hard enough to rally, especially when you're factoring things like DM. You're probably going to have a lot of conscript squads with that 2 ELR. Depending again on the shots, obviously, but don't be surprised if you're going to end up with a lot of conscript squads and all that entails. If you're lucky enough to battle harden, then you'll be the elite 447. Like the Japanese, the Chinese have 3 leaders, including a 9-1. Depends where you put him. This 9-1 probably going to be stacked with one of the MMGs, again, to give you a modifier. I would probably not stack both MMGs in the same location. It's just going to draw fire from the Japanese. But typically the 9-1 is probably going to be in the front leading the units, while the 7-0 could stay behind, maybe even the 8-0 in different locations, and you can attempt your rallies using those guys. They will help you avoid cowering, obviously, if you're with them. However, they might be better served in the rear to help rally all these units that are going to be constantly. The Chinese also have 3 foxholes which can be placed. Now, in concealment terrain, remember, these can be set up in HIP. It's not until you claim the benefit that they are revealed. So if you set these up around your gun positions, maybe with a couple of HIP units, the Japanese has to kind of guess where they are. Now, they've had the same TM as the jungle with +2, so You probably don't want to use these in the jungle around the guns, but maybe some open area or kunai, open ground, palm tree area where you can possibly set up concealed would be a good start. For firepower, we have two mediums and we have three LMGs. Again, all five of those have a breakdown of 11, so you got to be careful about that. Obviously, don't be intensive firing too much, or I should say sustained firing. And then finally, we have our guns. So, as we said, we have our three guns. These are the positions that they start with. You can freely rotate them in your turn, but they cannot leave this hex, can never be concealed and or in place. Now, these guns themselves are capable of firing white phosphorus with a depletion number of 7. Remember, canister is not available. However, they are capable of firing white phosphorus. So what's typically probably going to happen is at some point, the Japanese are probably going to be coming in through this kind of area. Obviously not the bamboo. So you're going to be firing basically point blank unless for some reason they decide to enter from the west around the open ground or the kunai, or maybe they break through this way on the right. But again, you're going to be firing basically point blank. These will also never be permanently disabled unless you sustain fire. So should you or intensify your gun and you roll an 11 or 12, then they will be permanently gone. All right, so let's look at some terrain analysis now to help break down the battle space here. To do this, we're going to use the Akoka factors, observation fields of fire, cover and concealment, obstacles, key terrain, and then avenues of approach. And by and large, he's going to impact both sides, attacker and defender. When it comes to observation and fields of fire, the terrain is going to be quite dense. We have our kunai here in the bottom left here, which has a nice bamboo stand right in the center. Remember, bamboo is going to be inherent terrain, which means no LOS along the hex spine, and kunai is going to be treated like brush. Jungle pretty well cuts the center of the map, and then there are some swampy areas which obviously have to be avoided. However, in general, your observation is going to be quite limited. Now, Chinese can set up on hex row 3 and to the north, so you will be able to set up some positions up front here and maybe interdict Japanese that enter in this way. Once you're in the center, aside from this 3 hex bamboo stand, it's going to be very difficult for you to get any kinds of line of sight. Maybe through the palm trees once you get into that. But again, at this point, they're going to be close to your gun positions, and it might be the middle half, last part of the game. So if you want to get them as quickly as possible, you're probably going to have to set up some elements forward and or use your machine guns in strategic locations to help cut them down. And the same with the Japanese attacker. Coming across, you're going to be fairly exposed in the brush, or the kunai, excuse me. You will get a +1 for intervening hexes for line of sight. It will negate open ground, but you may want to, depending on how the Chinese sets up, move quickly or slowly. And either way, your observation is going to be hindered. There's going to be a lot of concealment that's going to have to be busted, which brings us to cover and concealment. So in this case, remember the jungle is always going to be +2. Kunai is only a +1 hindrance between the hexes, not the one you're in. And bamboo is probably going to have to be avoided, although there is this nice trail which does cut through these 2 hexes. So the defender, you could fall back through here, but in general, the Japanese is probably going to want to avoid the bamboo. It sucks up all your move, and if you advance into it in the advance phase, you become CX in the process. There's almost 0 open ground hexes. There's a couple over here in the west, maybe some down here in the east side. However, most cover will exist in the center if you use the jungle, and your leaders will be able to move your 3 hexes, advance, depending again where the Chinese defender is. You can maybe move your full move, or you could just creep along, move in 1 hex, assault move, advance, assault move, advance. By this time, you're into the woods at turn 3, and you still have another 3.5 turns to complete your objective. So if you want to retain concealment as a Japanese, you could just inch your way forward. Of course, you'll probably be taking shots the whole time. Now, remember the Chinese have 3 foxholes. Again, it's same TM as the jungle. So probably maybe these locations here, maybe across this kunai and the palm trees, maybe in this kind of location, something like that is probably a better use for that. Maybe in these 3 palm tree hexes, just to give you some kind of fallback depth position in front of your guns. When it comes to obstacles, again, the map is going to be full of them. You have several water obstacles you have to worry about that are going to cut off paths. You have your marshes or swamps, which are almost impassable. And again, bamboo, which will suck up all of your move. The jungle is going to be preventing most long-range shots. You're going to be firing adjacent, especially when it comes to the gun positions, unless you decide for some reason to flank them on the west or the east side. You can maybe approach them in the open, but then that would probably be foolhardy. So you're going to be coming into the jungle, firing point blank fire at them. The train's going to basically channel the Japanese into a couple locations. There's this way here between the pond and the bamboo, and then there's this section of jungle here because again we have marsh on either side of this strip here. So we might send some units in here. We can also do a flanking on the right side. Just be aware that any Chinese units will be set up in the trees and they'll be able to hammer you when you move in the open ground. So Japanese movement's definitely going to be hindered by the marsh swamp and the water obstacles. When it comes to key terrain, there's only the three gun positions that we have to worry about, and they're the only key terrain that exists in this scenario. The Japanese must capture and destroy all 3, or they must be in the same hex as them without any good order Chinese in the process. So it's a tall order for the Japanese. You have to fight your way through 15 squads of Chinese. Then you have to make sure you get in the hex, surviving any point blank fire from that 75 artillery piece. Once you're in that hex, then you can, if you're alive after all that, and you've engaged the crew, then you just have to make sure that they're eliminated. It has to be a good order Chinese unit, so if they're broken at the end of the game, then obviously they won't count for denying purposes. And then lastly, we have avenues of approach. Again, the approach for the Japanese will be primarily on how the Chinese defend. Japanese attacks are limited, as we pointed out. You can come up through this little sliver and then spread out. You can attack in the center, or you can come through the more open side on the west. Right side probably should be avoided. There's just too much open ground, unless the Chinese set up weak on that side, in which case, by all means. Typically, I can see the Japanese coming on in 2 waves. One is through the center, and then either the left or the right flank, depending again on the Chinese setup. If you want to worry about concealment as a Japanese, make sure you move slowly using assault move. You're going to have to avoid the bamboo unless you use the path, of course. So you're going to be skirting a lot of the terrain features. But if you want to retain concealment, it's going to be slow going, and it will take you several turns to get up close. However, you're less likely to be destroyed in the process. So it's going to have to be some combination of risk versus reward over how many units that you want to lose concealment on. And you still have to determine where the Chinese defender is setting up his 3 foxholes with his hip units as well. When it comes to the use of the bonsai on the DC hero, just remember that you're probably going to have to be point blank when you declare your bonsai or DC hero charge. You're only going to have the 1 hex. Again, you're going to have to endure all kinds of defensive fire in the process, but you might get it off. You never know. But you're going to have to tactically decide when's a good time to use your DC heroes. Last point for the Japanese, obviously, again, because we have our 3 gun positions, you want to avoid stacking in front of them whenever possible, because the point blank shot is just going to decimate you. Luckily, they don't have canister. They only have white phosphorus, but it will still do a number on you, might break up your attack, and something you're going to have to be aware of. So try to avoid stacking in front of the gun. They're probably going to intensive fire at least once or twice, depending on how many guns decide to do that at their own risk. But something that you're going to have to worry about as a Japanese is how they fire upon you. And there we have Initial Recce for Scenario 153, the Totsugeki. Should be an interesting one. I think Dave and I are going to appreciate this one a lot more than the Kokoda Trail one. The terrain is dense like it is before. However, it's got Chinese versus Japanese, which is really cool. The hardest part for the Chinese, I think, is going to be avoiding the ELR failure. And I could see definitely a lot of conscripts showing up by the end of play. On the other hand, you could also have a couple of elites. Generated battle hardening is always possible. The two Dare Death Squads that they can have are something that the Japanese will be unable to anticipate. Obviously, I won't know when Dave decides to do them. We never ended up using them when we did our Shanghai and Flames game. It just didn't work out for Dave, I guess, to use them at the right time. Again, it's a decision you're gonna have to make tactically. Do you employ it at the risk of losing the unit? If it meets your requirements, then do it. If it's not, then there's probably not much point to it. Japanese bonsai, for the same reason, may or may not happen depending on the terrain and the length of the game. If you're near the end and you still haven't taken anything, you may have to risk a bonsai to charge through all that jungle, assuming you can get some kind of line of sight to some units. So hopefully it's been instructive and of some use to you. I'm going to try and keep these short, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.